This is a repeat of the MCAS testing presentation that was given to the Burlington School Committee on October 22nd, 2013. Here is a quick snapshot of our demographics in the Burlington Public Schools. If you've been looking at these numbers over the last couple years, you can see a slight change in first language, not English, English language learners, low income, and free and reduced lunch over these last few years. Before I get started with this year's Burlington results, it's important to mention that the MCAS is a criterion reference test in place to determine whether schools and students have met the grade level standards that are put in place. It is not a norm reference test, which is used to rank students and/or schools. Here's an example of a norm reference test, a test where every student is starting at the same point, no matter what their skill set is at the start of the race. Here's an example of a criterion reference test, where we have one group starting here, and another individual starting here. And if they're all starting in different places, is it really fair to measure who gets here first? I want to spend some time talking about growth with this slide from the Department of Education. The Department of Education defines typical growth between 40 and 60 in this gap here. This slide articulates the graphic from the previous slide and again says that typical student growth is between 40 and 60 on most tests. And again, if you're below 40, it's low growth, and you're above 60, then it would be considered higher growth. Here's a look at some individual scores that show clearly why student growth is important to look at. If we look at Harry's score, who is clearly the highest scoring student over the course of grades 5, 6, and 7, we can see that he only had a growth percentage in 2008 of 25%, which is actually low growth, because his score went from 248 to 244. Ivy, on the other hand, who entered grade 6 with a score of 214 and finished with 226 in grade 7, actually was at 92% growth, which is at the very high end of the growth percentage. Whether we're looking at individual scores, school-wide scores, or district scores, student growth should play a large factor in how we look at schools. So when we look at Burlington scores from 2013, we can see clearly that we showed growth in the 40 to 60 range in all areas. Here's a look at our student growth scores in ELA from across the Burlington Public Schools from last year's MCAS. We can see that all of our schools are well into the typical growth range. We see a similar trend in math, with all of our schools well into the typical growth range, with both Francis Wyman and Memorial right on the borderline of higher growth. Because the MCAS is just a once-a-year test where we take it in the spring and then don't get the results to the fall, it's important that we talk about some of the other ways that we measure students along the way to ensure that we're seeing growth. Three times a year we assess all of our students in math and English at the elementary level. At these times, we're able to see areas of strength and weakness, both in individuals and across grade levels. And here's an example of a recent reading test that we gave all of our first graders at the beginning of this year. This chart shows how our teachers are able to use assessments and ensure that students are making progress throughout the year. At the beginning of last year in grade 2 and 3 across the district, we had 191 and 213 students respectively in Tier 1, which means they were reading at grade level. At the end of the year, we had 213 students and 231, as you can see, which is a jump of 22 and 18 students respectively. These types of changes are due to the hard work of our staff, the frequent assessments, and the focused instruction that they're able to give students based on the results of those assessments. We agree with the points made by the Department of Education on this slide about MCAS. In fact, we changed our elementary math curriculum this year due to some of our past MCAS results. But we also know that some of the assessments we do throughout the year help us to identify students and gather diagnostic information much more quickly than if we just waited for the MCAS results to come in. If you're interested in looking at more MCAS data from Burlington Public Schools, just go to bit.ly/BPS profile to bring you to the Department of Education's in-depth analysis of all districts' MCAS results.